As the crisis continues to go on, people are trying to go off and make arguments about the economic impact and whether or not the economic impact is worse than the impact of the virus itself. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, such as people looking out for their own economic interest versus the totality of life. So as we take a look here at the comparisons, I just want to point out that first, the death rate within the United States is currently at 1.31%, which is an increase from where it was last week, with a variance based off of geographical location of New York at 0.89% death rate, California at 1.95% death rate, and Washington at 4.99% death rate. The global average, of course, this is with China no longer doing testing in order to bring their own numbers down, being at 4.36% death rate, with Germany at under 0.5% death rate, France at 4.27% death rate, and Britain at 4.99% death rate. With this variance in the death rate, where the only difference that we are seeing is the number of infection, therefore the level of medical care each person can get, and as the number of people needing to be hospitalized as a result, increases, so does the death rate. There has also been prediction that the infection rate possible for the population within the United States could be somewhere between 40 to 80%, which means, based off of the variance in the death rates, we could have 2.5 million to 10.5 million people who die as a result. So you are completely unable to make any comparison whatsoever to the economic impact versus the loss of life if we don't shut everything down. Okay? Now, based on that, when we take a look at the underlying arguments from those who have been held up as conservative leaders and conservative voices, both on the individual brand level and on a corporate brand level, outlet level, we see that the argument tends to boil down to two basic arguments here. The first, capitalism is a house of cards, right, with a fundamentally flawed foundation, and therefore having a 2-week pause in our economy brings everything crashing down. Unemployment is going to skyrocket up to 30%, and the economic disaster is going to outweigh the disaster of the crisis. I'm trying to avoid the YouTube censorship here. So therefore, everything that we are doing is worse than the outcome of the virus. All right. That is one. And I disagree with that premise that, capitalism is a house of cards and everything is going to come crashing down. But it's interesting that some people seem to be leading to that particular conclusion here in their arguments. And therefore, you wonder, if that's what your belief is, are you now advocating that we completely rethink the entire capitalist model from which you have been praising all the way up until this point? Are you saying we need to radically change the entire economy? Right? Because if that is the case, I don't think you're really that much of a conservative. You're just pandering to the crowd in order to build up your own profits and your own brand. And if you don't believe in capitalism at this particular point in time, when we need capitalism the most, then you going out and praising capitalism later on, it only adds to you being a complete and total fraud. Now, the second point that people seem to be making, or the second conclusion that we can make from the arguments that are being made, is while capitalism is successful, what we are seeing here from the economic impact is that our management of the wealth created by capitalism has been horrible, and we've horribly mismanaged it. And this is something that I can agree with, and maybe we need to rethink how we manage the resources generated by capitalism. So for instance, we see here in personal finance situations that any financial experts will tell you that you need to have 3 to 6 months worth of expenses saved up in an emergency fund. And we're also seeing people talking about having 3 to 6 months, or at least 1 to 3 months of emergency food supply as part of your emergency fund or emergency preparedness. Right? And yet we see that on average for decades, 7 out of 10 people in the country are living paycheck to paycheck with next to nothing saved for emergencies. Now, let's take a look at that on a corporate level. We see all these corporate profits. We're talking about, billions of dollars to hundreds of billions of dollars in profits. And yet what we are seeing here is that taking a 15-day pause in which we close down non-essential businesses, in-person interaction, and even just working from home, right? That the economic impact of this, businesses, can't survive 15 days of operation, which means they, out of their hundreds of billions of dollars, have had no planning for financial emergencies, right? And so we're seeing that the wealth that was created by capitalism has been horribly mismanaged. Take a look at if businesses were to have, 1 to 3 months or 3 to 6 months worth of expenses saved up for an emergency. When these things happen, a virus outbreak, a terrorist attack, or whatever, and we see businesses, they have 3 months of expenses saved up and can easily handle the financial impact of this. We wouldn't see such huge dives in the stock market because investors will be able to take a look at it and go, hey, yes, okay, you're able to weather the storm. Or, hey, we're closed for 15 days. You got 3 months of expenses. This is no big deal. This wouldn't even be a blip on the radar. And so once we get through this particular crisis, it is my belief that we need to start taking a look at how we are managing the finances of the wealth generated by capitalism. We should start requiring businesses to have an emergency fund. Now, how much of an emergency fund can be debatable, but I would say at a very bare minimum, based off of what we've seen from prior economic disruptions, businesses should have at least 1 month of expenses saved up. I would like to go at least 2 months of expenses saved up as an emergency fund, as part of our managing the wealth generated by capitalism to avoid the economic damage created by situations such as this. And therefore, we'll have a much more stable environment. I agree. We need to have a conversation about wealth management from capitalism that we have seen. And we need to start having a serious conversation in personal finances and building up an emergency fund. But all these people freaking out about the economic meltdown that is going on, either you're saying that capitalism is fundamentally flawed, built on a house of cards, or you're saying we need to have a huge, huge discussion here about how we're managing that wealth. But going off and saying that the economic impact is going to be more devastating than this virus, and therefore, 2.5 to 10.5 million people that are going to die is nothing in comparison to the economic damage. It shows a complete lack of faith in our capitalistic system, especially when you see all the regulations that have been tossed out and that is creating an environment for which the economy can come back roaring stronger than ever. Regardless of which side of those two main points you be making here, from your whole economic damage analysis, the underlining point that we need to have here is, yes, we do need to have a serious conversation about what we're going to do, for preparedness after this. Now, as far as it goes, I don't know. We took this 15 days to slow the spread here so that we can measure what the impact is, gather some data, increase our medical capacity, take a look at finding vaccines and cures in order to handle the situation in such that the impact is as minimal as possible. We're trying to gather the data in order to determine the right course of action. But those freaking out over the economy, your complete lack of faith in our ability to weather the storm is deeply disturbing. I think we can handle it. I think we can handle 15 days. All right? So let me know what you think, about the conversation that is going on. Take a look at the comments down below and write your comments and feedback down below. Do you think that this is telling of, the conservative, leaders not having actual faith in the things that they are preaching? Or do you think it's an opening for a conversation regarding how we manage the wealth and providing emergency funds at both the company and individual levels, how important the emergency fund is and how that conversation needs to be going. Write your comments down below. I'd be glad to hear from you.